Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. And today we have with us Beerud Sheth, the person who sort of founded, Gupshup right now, which is the platform that he's founded. But before this, he founded another company called Elance, which was really one of the precursors of the gig economy. And we are going to talk to him about the life of an entrepreneur. So, over to you, Beerud. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us on Dreamers and Unicorns. What I wanted to do was to actually get started first by asking you a personal question. I'm going to start with that personal question. What is the meaning of Beerud? What does it really mean?
Oh, it's a Sanskrit word that means padvi or honor or an award. And I guess my mom looked deep in the dictionary to find this because it's a fairly unusual name, even by Indian standards. And the fringe benefit I have of a name of like this is that I can get it in any namespace. So on Yahoo or Skype or Gmail, it just Birud. I don't need to add any digits after it, right? There's only one of me. So
So there
anyway,
can never be Beerud15 at gmail.com. It's all
exactly.
okay. All right. That's great. Beerud, I'm going to sort of divide this conversation into two chunks. One, I want to talk to you about the sort of early influences. Then we'll talk about the gig economy and how you sort of really went about building that. And then we'll talk about your current workspace. So, do you have a preference in terms of how we should start from now, or we should start at the back? Looking at it, the making of Beerud Sheth. Which of these two is a better story arc for you?
No, I'm fine either way, but I guess the chronology might make more sense going from early to now.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to sort of really start by saying that when you look at your early years, how do you sort of define the influences that you've had as you were growing up? What were those, who were some of the people who deeply influenced you, or incidents that influenced you? Where you first felt you wanted to be an entrepreneur, or was that not something that you thought about?
Well, not quite in that fully formed way, but anyway, let's start, right? So I think I mean I grew up in a sort of average middle class family in Mumbai. I think growing up in Mumbai or growing up at that time in the 70s and 80s. Um, One is we had limited means and resources, right? So frugality is a value that you just grow up with, right? You don't think about it. You reuse, you recycle, you reduce your usage, you sort of just live within your means. But on the other hand, you're just surrounded by lots of love and relationships and family. So that's the good part. I think, of course, Indian parents value education, so all of us were beneficiaries of that focus on education. I just love
What
I
about
just
usage? How was it told to you? What was told to you?
oh well, that education is the way to a better life. And we've nothing. I mean, you don't have a lot of money, you're not given a lot of inheritance, but what you have is sort of what's in between your ears, right, in your head. And you got to use that to find your way, to a good life. um, but no pressure as such, right? I mean, it just sort of do the best you can. And I think for me, I mean, I was just a curious, inquiring mind. I think the good thing was my parents just let me explore, let me try different things, and they really loved. My dad was really a fan of math, so he just made me love it or enjoy it in a way. My mom was always very creative, hacking solutions, if you will, finding creative ways, and I think that rubbed onto me as well. And I took,
What was a creative solution you remember?
oh, I don't know. I mean, it could just be, improvising. If something is missing, then you find something else in the house that looks like it, and you improvise it, and you never, or even just Yeah, I think, for example, I mean, she used to work in the insurance industry, and she'd have to, um, she had to go out to work, which means I'd be left alone at home because my dad was also working. And so she signed me up to some place, and it'd be a lot of overhead. If I think about it now, she'd have to, you know, take me to, we lived in Borivali. She used to take me somewhere to Santa Cruz, drop me at this kids sort of play area, and then go to work, then come back, pick me up, then come back home, and so on. And right, she was always, even as it was tiring and exhausting, I mean, she'd focus on just really child development, if you will, right? And I'd say I'd have 1 hour class for badminton or something, but I'd stay there the whole day, sitting in the library, hanging out, meeting friends, and so on, because I'd nowhere to go. But in some ways, I needed. I never realized that it was a problem, because I really enjoyed it, had a good time. I took like fish to water. I read up all the books in the library on my own, and a lot of Amar Chitra Kathas, if you know, right? I mean, this was when I was really young, but later on, I just took like fish to water to just, I don't know, math, science. There was then, yeah, she heard about something called Bombay Talent Search or National Talent Search, which now is fairly commonplace, but at that time was fairly uncommon. So again, I mean, she just, you know put me up, for expose me to all of these things, and saying, see if you like this, and so on. And it was just lots of exposure and such, which was really, influential, and I enjoyed it. In fact, it was funny, these classes were in Matunga, and they said, okay, uh, coming from Borivali, this is in eighth or ninth grade, right? I mean, you're really young. And the teacher said, how is the kid going to try, come alone? I'm only going to admit if you bring in, three other kids. So then she went around and drafted, three other kids who would go along with me, so that we could be a group, going to these classes safely, traveling on our own in local trains, and so on. So I think just some of these were early influences, but I never felt like we, lacked for anything, because we had whatever I needed in my then worldview. We had in abundance. There were always, lots of friends, lots of family, lots of books. What more do you need, right?
So, is it better for an entrepreneur to have a mindset of abundance, or is it better to have a mindset of scarcity? What creates a better entrepreneur?
Oh, I mean, certainly frugality is a key prerequisite. And even if you have a lot of funding, like, say, and we'll come to that right now, right? We've got a big round of funding, but the frugality mindset is not just doing things with less money, but it's doing more with whatever you have, right? Stretching the limits, pushing the limits, and so on. So absolutely essential. But in early stages, it's critical, because you usually, you may raise a few $100,000 or $1 million, and really, the statistics say that most companies die simply because they run out of money. It's not that it's a bad idea. It's not that it didn't work. It's just that you didn't last long enough to be able to figure out whether it was a good idea or not, or to be able to deploy your vision, and so on. And frugality can stretch your runway. It can help you, keep going, and to innovate more, to ideate, to iterate over different examples, and so on. So absolutely, frugality is key. Another direct influence I can tie to that is also, never getting hassled, right? I mean, nothing goes as planned. Like at that time, if the trains are not working, you still have to show up to work. You just figure out, and it may take a half an hour longer to get there, but you just go. You don't complain, right? If the rickshaw is not working, you get a bicycle and get to the train station, right? If something doesn't happen on schedule, you just get on with it. You don't complain. You just sort of, you do it. And it's the same thing with your entrepreneurial life. Nothing is ever going to go as planned. You're just going to improvise, figure it out, adjust, go with the flow, and so on, right? And it was funny that, like, in some other places, conversely, when things go exactly as scheduled, always on time, and then you're just conditioned to expecting that, and when it doesn't, you can get very frazzled, and so on. So I think I've just found that these are, I think in many ways, Indians, are natural entrepreneurs, right? Because you are between frugality and resiliency, and just sort of being calm about things. I think it helps. Now, I'm not saying everybody or every Indian is like this, but I think in general, the ecosystem is such that it forces you, to be that way. Yeah.
When you finished your school, what was your career choice? I mean, what did you want to be? If somebody had asked you in class 8, 9, 10th, whatever, when you were old enough to sort of understand some career choices, what was it in your head? What did you want to do?
Oh, solve cool problems, have some impact on the world. I think it was really abstract in some sense, right? Because um, like I was telling you, like national talent search, it tests. I mean, these are really IQ tests. They make you solve puzzles really, and it was a lot of fun. And I was like, really? I mean, you could work just doing things like this. It's only much later than I realized that a lot of things in life you do. I mean, sort of problem solving and really tricky problem solving is a rare skill, and if you can do that and do that well, that helps. Now, I went to IIT Bombay, and there I studied computer science, again, partly because every advisor or every uncle I talked to would be like, okay, this is the future, so you got to do focus on that if you could. And fortunately I had a high rank, so I had that choice. But I really, again, loved computer science. It was very, it's exactly that, problem solving. It's a lot of it is just math, analytical, algorithmic. So it was a lot of fun. So I stayed with computer science, but it's not like before I got in there I had, I knew exactly where that would lead. So yeah, the earliest sense of it was, yeah, just work on the most challenging, exciting, interesting puzzles and problems that you can find, and let's see where that leads. And obviously, as I went through it, you sort of realize much more. After IIT, I ended up at MIT as well, and that just exposed me to a lot more things, right? I mean, things happening on a global scale. Um, so I think that sort of one thing led to another. Yeah.
When you compare the environment of, let's say, IIT, you went to IIT Mumbai and then you ended up in MIT. Um, what is it that you see as a inherent strength of the IIT, or versus the MIT? What would that be?
Oh, well, I don't know if versus MIT, because I think they were very similar experiences in some sense, right? I think they really take the cream of the crop, if you will. They at least in the STEM fields, they take the best kids they can find in the country and put them together. And you'd think it's sort of hyper competitive, which it is, but it's surprisingly also very collaborative. I mean, I've formed some of the best relationships that survive to this day, right? Really, my closest friends are people I went to school with, even though back then we used to compete a lot and fight a lot. I think MIT had the same dynamic as well, right? Just they sort of take the best kids from the US or globally, actually, and put them there. Maybe the difference, to the extent it existed, was because I did undergraduate school versus graduate school. It's a little different, right? Undergraduate school is a lot more of coursework. Graduate school is a lot more of research. So you're more, focused on just your lab and your work and so on, versus uh, lots of group activities and lots of large classrooms and so on, right? So I think maybe that was the difference. But in terms of school, of course, MIT has a ton more resources, right? So again, Indian institutions are frugal, but also very creative and resourceful, right? The books are the same, but the computers are not, and you kind of you have to push the limits of what your computers can do to develop some of these things. But I think it was really great preparation. I mean, there was no challenge whatsoever on the core things, right? I think the bigger learning, perhaps, going from undergrad to grad school, right? So there are many strengths and weaknesses, I think, of the Indian education system, right? I think certainly, in some ways, there's a greater emphasis on education among all families. People like doing it. It can be hyper competitive, which is again good or bad, right? If you're at the top of the pyramid, it's a great thing, but it can really be challenging and distressing for a lot of other people, right? So I don't know if it's entirely good, but obviously many people who went through IIT and so on benefited from this today. But the other thing is, you're always told what to do, right? All through high school and undergraduate school. Well, this is the course you take, and that's it. And when I got to MIT for grad school, it was kind of funny, I'd go to the admissions office and say, what courses do I have to take? And they ask you, like, what do you want to do? And it's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I've been told all along what to do, and now you have to think, right? And you have to find and chart your own path through the education system. What is it that you're really passionate about? And it's surprising, right? It was a very new phenomena at that time. But it really forced you to think, like, to your earlier question, right? That was the first time where you really started thinking, okay, what is it that I want to do? Where do I want to go? What is it I want to specialize in or study or, interesting? So,
so what did you want to study? What was that?
So yeah, it changed a lot, and I discovered a lot, and I think it was a process of self-discovery. So for example, in my case, I'd done coming out of IIT, I'd done my research and published a paper in distributed computing, right, which was sort of one part of computer science.
So explain to me in layman's terms, what is distributed computing?
It just, connecting lots of computers in parallel to make a bigger computer, right? So that's sort of one specialized field of science. But even before I got to MIT, I read all the brochures and I saw these images of people working on AI, right? Artificial intelligence. They were sort of trying to simulate human behavior, create a hand, create a foot, whether it's physical human behavior or even interactive, intelligence. So I said, okay, this sounds more interesting or more cool. So even before I got to MIT, I changed it. And MIT was really cool about, allowing you academic freedom to study whatever it is you want. So I did that. But when I got to MIT, now this was in the early 90s, Cold War was over, defense funding was declining. So the AI lab had less funding, but then I went to the media lab and I worked on, again, AI for personalized newspapers, right, which was super interesting. I took courses in the management school at Sloan School, which I was just curious about, right? This is where I started sort of thinking about, okay, technology is great in and of itself, but what impact does it have on the real world? How can I apply it? And, how do you make a dent in the universe? As the cliche goes in Silicon Valley, you want to have some real impact, not just academic problem solving, right? So this is where a lot of that development happened about, sort of how the world works and how money works, right? Which was super interesting. So by the time, and perhaps the most important realization was, so I was admitted to the PhD program, but I realized that I didn't want to stay in academia. I wanted to be in the world of business, entrepreneurship, and try something along those lines, right? So already I'm taking these courses at business school along with my research in computer science. And I think that sort of really, when it got crystallized or formalized into saying, okay, I like working at the intersection of technology and business, of using, all the things that I'd learned to have some real world business impact.
So when you think about this transition, so one of the things that I think about is you worked in a place which was full of technology. You looked at artificial intelligence. It was that, and then of course you come into, as you say, the real world or the business world, which is entirely people raising funds, finding talent. Where did that skill get developed? Because clearly this is not something that you planned for. So is it something that takes very little time to develop? How does it go?
I guess I don't know. Maybe my Gujarati blood or something like that. No, I'm just kidding. I think so. The things that you don't learn that in general, right? Again, generalizing, the Indian education system isn't good at is really, you know, letting you experiment, freestyle thinking, right? Figuring out what you want to do, or a lot of the interpersonal skills, right? Sort of persuasive skills, right? Conflict resolution skills, having debate, challenging, trying to convince the other person to your point of view, and still, being mature and cool about it even when they disagree with you, and so on. And these are all very, very essential skills, right? So being a salesperson is something you just have to do. You have to sell your ideas. um, or working in large groups, leading, following, and so on. Now, of course, in IT, a lot of it, at least for me, happened informally. I mean, you just participate in hostile activities or other group activities where you're always debating, fighting, challenging, creating teams, doing things. So you pick it up along the way, right? I think so really, but it does take and that, and also risk taking, right? Which I saw a lot of my ID friends, in a way, by the way, a lot of this academic success, it in some ways it kind of sets you up to be risk averse, right? Because you've done all of this, and by the way, once you graduate, you can get almost the best salary jobs that there are, and it's not that challenging, and therefore a lot of people would just say, you know what, it's good already. Why take a risk, right? Because I've succeeded in everything. Why put myself in a position where it could fail? And that fear of sort of a track record of success can also lead to a fear of failure, and so on, right? So
Is
uh,
that why you decided to go and take a job in the financial sector where you work with Citi and Merrill Lynch and
No, actually, so in my case, in my thinking, really, I knew. I mean, I'd learned everything there was at that time, to learn in computer science. I felt very confident about it. What I didn't know enough of was about the business world, right? So, in a sense, my sort of 5-year stint on Wall Street was more like my business school experience, which really taught me a lot about negotiation, about selling. I mean, initially I was modeling sort of securities, right, which is more computer science than finance, if you think about it, because you're really developing these financial models, which are all sort of based on statistics and computer algorithms and so on. So, and then a couple of years later, sort of I became the trader of these securities, a bond trader, if you will. But in that process, right, you're hedging risk, you're building a portfolio, you're trading, you're negotiating, you're strategizing, and so on. So I think it helped. That was like I said, my business school experience. But meanwhile, and while I was there, now it's in the mid 90s. The internet happened, right? Sort of Netscape went public, Amazon, eBay, Yahoo, all of these companies were being formed. And I was like, okay, now it's real. A lot of it felt theoretical, while I was in school, but it's starting to have this huge impact on the real world. And that's where I kind of got back to my sort of, got back to the intersection of business and technology. I mean, and that's something sort of I felt, I was sort of, without really being conscious of it, was headed in that direction anyway. I think the fear of failure never bothered me. I mean, I felt like, okay, I'm confident. I feel I have nothing to prove in an academic sense, but there's a lot to prove on the business side. And I think what good is all the skill sets and all the experience that you've developed if you can't sort of solve some interesting problems, create some new things, have an impact, on the world, and so on, right? So that's how I felt. I mean, I was just drawn to it. It didn't, just sort of doing a basic job at that time didn't excite me. It just really wanted to have more creative freedom and drive it. Now things have changed a lot these days, right? I mean, a lot of tech startups today provide that creativity while without having to take so much risk, while being part of a large organization. So I think these days there are many more choices than there used to be. But sort of that's how I ended up where I am.
Perfect. Just to sort of recap for those of us who've joined in late, uh, I'm talking to Beerud Sheth. He is the co-founder of Gupshup. He is the CEO of the company as well, and he also, formed another company which was at that point of time called Elance, and later it became Upwork as a result of a merger. We'll get talking about that, but that's coming up for you. We have a couple of comments that some of our viewers have put together. They've shared. Preeti Shroff talks about the early influences, frugality, family education, and experience of hacking solutions. And she also says the great insights, thank you. Real impact is the true measurement of education, entrepreneurship, technology, and learning. So that's Preeti. And then you have Naina Prabhu, who says, such a wonderful description of your mother, Beerud. So you have some of the listeners' comments. So thanks a lot for listening in. And just to recap, we are going to really start moving into your entrepreneurial journey and really start with this question, which I have always been intrigued about. When you start a company, is it true that when you're an engineer, you're dealing with a lot of things which are binary? So it's either right or wrong, whether it's coding, whether it's engineering problems. When you are working in business, you're working with people, and it is anything but binary. The same person is not going to respond in the same way to the identical stimulus. Is it tougher for somebody who's trained in a very binary thinking process? Do engineers find it harder to respond to human solutions or challenges? What is your take on that?
uh, no, I think quite the contrary. Or I don't think. Well, so the interpersonal. I mean, I don't know if there are good schools for interpersonal relationships or sort of teamwork and so on, right? That's something all of us are born with, and you sort of refine and optimize and so on. I think, and then the engineering thought process really helps you with the problem solving mindset, right? How do you do large complex things by breaking it into smaller components, by modularizing it, by solving each component separately, being very analytical about it, by leaving emotions out. And I found that a lot of when you deal with sort of the personal dimension of it, the people aspect of it, sometimes it helps to be a thoughtful and feeling and emotional person, but many times it actually helps to take emotions out of it, to depersonalize the issues and focus on whether it's right or wrong. And I think, for example, conflict resolution requires you to sort of actually take emotions out of it and really say, okay, what makes sense, or what's the best idea, right? It's not about egos, it's not about hierarchy, it's not about who likes whom the most. It really is looking at it objectively, saying what's the best idea, who has the best idea. You create a meritocratic environment that actually leads to sort of the best ideas coming up, the greatest growth for the company, the most innovation. Also, people stop playing politics when you when you don't play favorites. When you say, like, or if somebody comes and complains to you, my first question is, well, what did the other person say, right? Or did you talk to that person directly, right? Don't escalate to me until you try to resolve it. Or even if there are challenges and so on, right? I mean, it's a workplace is not a family, right? It's really, we are optimizing for business growth. We're not trying to optimize for personal happiness, right? So I think really just keeping that focus, I think the engineering mindset really equips you with a very, like you said, it's a bit of the opposite skill set, but equally as essential in solving the people aspect of it too. Now there's no doubt that some people are just they're far more EQ, far more intuitive, far more capable and so on. So of course, as a team, we have lots of people, many of whom are better than me in some of these other aspects, right? And so on. So you kind of have to know your strengths and your weaknesses and surround yourself with others who can complement you and so on, right? You don't need to be no one
That's
person.
also tougher. That's also much tougher, to work with people who are very different from you. And I actually want to sort of challenge this whole view that, you said that you take away the emotion and that's one part of it, and make it objective. Totally get that when you're trying to solve a problem, sometimes it's important to segregate the emotion and the person. But does it also mean that, when you take emotions out of it, the workplace becomes super transactional? And then you don't get all the things that you talk about: employee engagement, you talk about being passionate about a dream. Would you think that when you remove emotions, it also has the byproduct is that you make it super transactional? It's
Well,
the money, you do this and then I do it, kind of a thing. They make it
oh,
like that.
so I mean, yeah, fair enough. I think, look, this is such a complex topic that I don't think you can generalize to one end of the spectrum or the other. I think there are situations where diffusing emotions is better. There are other situations like leadership, inspiration, motivation are clearly emotions that drive, right? So there are constructive emotions that, passion, commitment, right, intensity, hard work, resiliency. Great. I mean, these are very critical and essential emotions to success, and you got to have that in spades. In fact, you want to over index on that side, right? And you want to under index on, I don't know, jealousy and politicking and on anger, on things like that, right? So I think there's, I don't think you can generalize entirely. So yeah, you want to have a lot of the right kind of emotions. One thing we talk about a lot is you want missionaries, not mercenaries, right? You want people who are excited about the mission of the company, what you're working on. It's not just for the money. They're just not here just for the compensation, because as you know, in a hyper competitive Indian market, no matter what salary you're at, you'll get, somebody will pay you. In fact, because you're at Gupshup, very likely somebody will pay you more, right? Out there. And you can't sort of play this game of matching and one-upmanship constantly, right? So if somebody is doing that, I mean, in fact, we try to filter that out right at the recruiting phase. But it's not like we're going to underpay by any stretch, right? Because you want everybody to have a good life, and everybody has to live. But on the other hand, you want people to be excited about what they're doing as well. So yeah, I think just finding the right balance, seeing where it's useful versus not. Yeah, I think it's really a balance.
And and you built one of the first places, at least that I know of, which is about the gig work. Finding opportunities for gig workers. What was that idea like? How did it evolve? What set you in that direction? How did you come up with that idea? Tell me about it.
Oh, so this was it was in the late 90s, and really this idea was a culmination of my life experiences until then, right? So this was in the late 90s. I was in, I graduated from MIT. I'd spent some time on Wall Street and so on. And as I now think back, right, so there may be some post facto revisionism, but not really, right? I think, coming from India, I knew that there were talented people all over the world, right? But so that's sort of one obvious life experience. Having studied computer science, I could see the immense power and impact of the internet to connect people in far-flung places. That was sort of my second, personal life experience. And then the third thing was, having worked on Wall Street, I knew that you could create marketplaces even for, seemingly illiquid securities, right? So not just for stocks and bonds that most people think about, but even for all kinds of other, mortgage-backed and asset-backed securities and things like that. So you take these sort of three ideas, right? And what you get is really a global services marketplace, a place where you can have freelancers from all over the world interacting and getting work done for people in other parts of the world, connecting through the internet, having a live marketplace where the price for doing work is determined by by the freelancers themselves, by the participants, and so on. And we set it up as a little experiment, which was, so the funny thing was, the beta version of the product. We said, where can we, getting a marketplace started is really, really hard. Where can we get some freelancers who can do some, high quality work for a low price, and then try some projects with it? So guess what? We went back to IIT, and there's a lot of, summer students who are always, they had some job, but oftentimes these are not interesting jobs. So they could work on, of course, coding projects. They were very good at those things. And any pocket money, especially in dollars at that time, was a lot for these kids. So even today, right, kids from that time, they remember they made a ton of pocket money, far more than whatever their internship paid them. And somebody would list a project saying, can you build me a website, or can you write this software program? And guess what, right? Like literally like 3 days later, right, it would get done. It would be very high quality, and it'd be very inexpensive, and really sort of validated that idea. So soon as that happened, we went public with it. We, launched it, more people signed up, and so on. And you just sort of, from that, you extrapolate to what today is Upwork, and there are millions of freelancers all over the world earning their livelihood through a site like this. Is such a, it's so gratifying that it has had such an impact, like I was saying earlier, right? So really, it's fostered, millions of entrepreneurs in a way, because a freelancer is really an entrepreneur, right? They're sort of, every day they come in and they create their own future, really. So very exciting. But yeah, that's how Elance got started. Even at a personal level, we didn't have a lot of money or resources. This is where Frugality comes in, right? We started in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York, or in Jersey City, which is just across the river, because we raised money from some friends. Again, the IIT alumni network, right? We had about 5 friends, each of whom brought like 3 or 4 investors in. So we had about 20 people. We raised $1 million. We are in this 2-bedroom apartment, and we grew to about 20 people who would come in the morning and leave in the evening. And our neighbors are wondering, like, what the hell is going on? Are you, in a place of residence, really? But we were just improvising with, it was all cramped. And in fact, my co-founder was actually using that as a bedroom at night when nobody was around, and in the daytime it'd be office, and so on. So I think it's been quite a story of how we got started here.
When you think about the marketplace, Upwork is obviously one of the largest gig platforms. Do you think the concept of a gig takes away the whole joy of working continuously on something? Does it make work very transactional, or does it really give you freedom? And is there a balance between the two?
Well, I think, firstly, there's no one size fits all, right? Some kinds of work are just inherently modular, right? I think, if you think about it, let's say, even as a company in normal circumstances, when you're working with lawyers, you don't need lawyers all the time, right? But if you're doing a transaction, if you're doing a deal, if you're negotiating something, you need them. But there are times where you don't need them, or like design work, right? You need them when you're launching something new, but once it's done, you want to be consistent with that design, so you're not changing it every time. And so when you go through it, right? In fact, it's funny. So there was an MIT professor who did some phenomenal research on the theory of organization, meaning what's the right size of a company. And he studied like over the past couple of 100 years, and sort of said, companies grow big when it makes sense, when it's easier to do transactions within the company than outside the company, right? But new technologies, especially the internet at that time, was making it easier to transact outside the company than inside the company, right? Because if somebody had a stationery shop, right, meaning office supplies, they could do a really good job at it rather than your department in-house. So you're better off working with them. And the internet allows you to very quickly go to their website, order it, and bring it in. So his point was, as internet gets more widely adopted, organizations grow smaller because you just keep your core competency inside and outsource the rest, right? It's sort of the Indian outsourcing industry, and then freelancing is an extension of that. And by the way, this is what he coined the term, sort of the Elance economy, which is where we took the name from. And then, we talked to him, made him an advisor, and so on. So I think, no, it's no one size fits all. I think there are things that need continuous sustained effort, but there's a lot of work that is just periodic, modular, on demand as needed. And companies need the flexibility to be able to scale up during, let's say, the holiday season when there's more demand for some services, and scale down when there's less demand, right? Maybe a call center, maybe a support operation, and so on. So I think the whole freelance model really gives businesses the flexibility to solve other kinds of problems that were not previously possible, right? So you now have nimbler organizations that can right size themselves over time, right? Literally by the day or the month, and so on. So I think, yeah, I mean, it's really. And by the way, you're seeing this, the computing equivalent of this is what we call cloud computing today, right? You might say, well, I want to own my computer because I use it all the time. But the reality is, oftentimes there's plenty of idle time. It's easier to let AWS manage, Amazon Web Services manage their whole thing. Or, by the way, this whole idea of freelancing and gig economy and sharing economy, as it's called, it all comes from the same place, right? So you might want to own your own car, but 80% of the time it's just sitting in the garage, right? What if Ola and Uber can find another passenger when you're not using it, but when you need it, you press a button and it shows up, right? We are all sharing the car. Or Airbnb, right? Yeah, you want to own your house, but your bedroom is lying idle. What if you could rent it out, you could make money, they benefit as well, right? So this whole idea of there being idle time that can be utilized better and optimized is good. It just unleashes greater efficiency through the ecosystem. It drives more flexibility. It drives less wastage, and so on. And it just it literally creates value out of nothing. I mean, it was just lying idle, right? So freelancers, a lot of it initially started with literally moonlighting, meaning that you have a day job, but you still have a lot of energy on the weekends or evenings and so on, and they want to work and they have the skill. So they just do a little bit of a project and get it done, but it's at a lower cost because it was idle time for them anyway, right? So they can make extra money, and it has to cost lesser than the market rate, and therefore it just drives fuller employment and so on. So I think these are really powerful, impactful ideas that have now gone on to transform the world we live in. Yeah.
Do you look at the world of gig work, so to say, with a sense of pride that it's created so many opportunities, or do you feel that your vision of how gig work should have been? Now a lot of people talk about the fact that gig workers don't have health insurance and all of that, and this notion of flexibility is not something that somebody can really sustain at a really minimum wage kind of a level. What is your take on that? I mean, how do you view it? I mean, it's really great opportunities for millions. There's no getting away from that. But
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it's in my mind, there's no question, there's no doubt at all that it's net positive, right? I think what's missing yet is that the rest of the world has to catch up to sort of this freelance lifestyle, right? Let me explain what I mean, right? So traditionally, so where did the idea of 9-to-5 jobs come from, right? That's not how thousands of years ago, that's not how people lived, right? You had the artisan economy, and you had people just doing in the village. You'd have people doing their own thing, or the trading communities and so on. But it was sort of in the industrial era, right, where you started having the steam engine and the factories that followed after that required, there's a standard place of work, right? Firstly, there's a fixed factory, and then you have to have shifts because it has to keep running, and then so there's a fixed amount of time and so on. And once people started going from 9-to-5, for example, then you had to create schools where kids could go at the same time, right, which also give you the school hours. because, well, the parents are at work, somebody has to watch the kids, and so on. So, and then the education system developed, so a lot of it came from the industrial era, right? So it's nothing, it's not sacred by any stretch, but over the 500 or so years that it developed, think about it, society also adjusted around it, which means healthcare and employment sort of got tied to your place of employment, right? So at least in the US, all your health insurance and benefits are provided by the employer. And that kind of worked. Now, the moment you get to, but the internet era is inherently different, right? It allows you to make connections with people all over the world instantly, flexibly, and so on, which is what's driving the freelance economy. It provides additional flexibility to businesses, to people. I mean, the fact that you can live anywhere and work anywhere. I mean, actually, just to fast forward, right? While we were preaching remote work, there were many people who were skeptical or doubtful and so on. But 2 decades and a pandemic later, it's now conventional wisdom. All of us, right? The world would practically have ended if we couldn't do remote work over the last couple of years with the pandemic, right? The fact that, and even in the US, for example, these remote towns where lifestyle is good are getting very popular because you can go live by the lake or in a nice, lovely place with less traffic, even as you're working in New York or in Silicon Valley and so on. So the point I'm making is it affords you these opportunities that you didn't have before. Either you had to live in downtown, like, if you're in Mumbai, you had to live like near Churchgate, or you live very far and commute for like 2 hours every day. But now, guess what? You could go live in Goa and work in Mumbai or Delhi. I mean, isn't that great? Now, the challenge is benefits, healthcare, which are employer linked. They need to change to be employee linked, right? So they stay with you no matter where you go, and every employer or every project, every freelance project you do gives you that extra, amount for benefits, but it gets aggregated at a personal level. Right. So Europe, for example, has less of an issue dealing with some of this because they have nationalized healthcare. Right. So it doesn't matter where you work. It's not coming from your employer. So you have flexibility to do different things and so on. So I think this is really, the world or, governments and benefit programs and, the rest of the ecosystem has to catch up with really this powerful force that's been unleashed with freelancing, right? So it's been like barely 2 decades since I started it, and just a few years since it's become widespread. So I think the world needs some time to catch up to what's really going on.
Tell me about your current setup in Gupshup. What is Gupshup? What does it do? Where do we see its impact? Talk to me about that.
So we describe ourselves as a conversational messaging platform. Okay, and these are big words. So let me explain. Right. Firstly, let's talk about basic messaging. Right. So most of your users today on their mobile phone, listeners on their mobile phone, they receive these text messages. Right. Either from their bank or from their e-commerce company saying, oh, you spent 100 rupees at the cafe, or your payment is due tomorrow, or maybe your order is confirmed, your package is shipped, and on, right? So these are, so businesses across industries and across geographies, right, worldwide, send a lot of these messages in real time to all their consumers. So we provide a platform that allows them to send these billions of messages, to lots and lots of people. We connect with mobile operators and to other networks to enable that delivery, and it's high performance, and there's a lot of complexity to it. So we manage all of that. That's the platform we provide, right? Now, so far, all of this messaging has been very basic, which says, you sort of get an SMS, very likely, or just a plain text message. But there are some newer technologies that are emerging, which allow that message to be much richer. So you can now put an image inside the message, right? So it could either be a logo or a chart or something that's relevant. Or you can put buttons and cards inside the messages so that, if you get some spend notification, you can, you can reschedule your delivery, or you can make a payment right away, and so on. And also, you can now have two-way conversation between the business and the consumer, right? And that's what's called a conversational messaging experience. And if that happens, now just through that message, you could, you get the payment reminder with one click, you make a payment, you get a delivery notification with another couple of clicks. You can reschedule the delivery, or with some order confirmation, they can give you a recommendation saying, here are some accessories, there's a special deal on that, and you can even shop for it. So, or if you have a complaint, you can, you can sort of just send a message. So suddenly chatting or interacting with business becomes as easy as chatting with a friend. You can just send a text message. So now you won't need to call the call center, assuming they have one, right? So if they have a call center and you call, you don't have to call them. You don't have to be on hold for like 15, 20 minutes. You don't have to explain the whole story. You're really just sending them a text message and say, I have this problem. I need a refund. Or I need to do this. And it just gets resolved right there. Or I need to upgrade my flight or reschedule, my hotel booking or whatever. All of that just gets done through conversational messaging. So it's a really big idea where, if you think about it, in the mid 90s, when the web came about, every business had to build a website because that's how customers were looking to interact with businesses. And today it's all commonplace. I think if you look forward a few years from now, every business, right, will be doing this. So the conversational experience is sort of the new digital storefront. This is where consumers are looking to interact with businesses. And if they, we will all just be able to chat with any business for getting deals and offers, for buying things from them, for reporting problems, for getting, so whether it's customer support or marketing or commerce, all of that would just be taken care of, maybe through WhatsApp, maybe through, SMS messaging, or newer technologies that are coming up will make it really, really easy to converse, right? So conversational experiences are a big phenomena. We are very excited about it. We are the leading platform. We provide all the tools and all the infrastructure that businesses need to make this work and to offer a delightful experience, right? And there's room for AI and natural language processing so that you can do these automated conversations with millions of people at very high scale. So anyway, that's what we're working on.
Yeah. So when you think about this whole experience of growing an organization, when you think about that, why is it that when you build an organization, the technology is going to be at a certain stage, and then technology evolves. You need different skills. So how do you build for that in the organization? What is your method of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in fact, we are living this right now as we speak. We are going through a hypergrowth phase and really, scaling fast. But the best analogy I've heard is that different company. There's a military analogy which says, there's at different stages of company growth, you need different kinds of people. In the early stages, you need commandos, right? Which are commandos are very versatile. They carry everything they need on their backpack. You can throw them, deep into enemy territory, and they'll figure out a way to establish a beachhead. And once that's done, right, then you bring in the army, right, which operates in a lockstep fashion. They need, a whole supply chain to support them. But they can, from the beachhead, they can go there and gain more territory, but they operate in large numbers with a lot of support and infrastructure. And finally, once all the territory is captured, then you need the police force, right, to maintain law and order, right? They're just making sure that things are working fine, that there are no complaints, and so on. And each of these is a very different skill set, right? So at early stages, and that's very true with tech startups as well. In the beginning, you need these versatile people who are comfortable with lack of structure and lack of, you do whatever is required, and the job requirement might vary by the day because different things happen and different, you have to deal with it. But it's a small team that can be very aggressive and figure that out. And then as it scales up, now you bring in the specialists, right? Growth marketing, or it could be, sales in a particular region, and so on, right? and then finally you also bring in operations people and scale, so that they can really run it at very high scale without things breaking, right? Or everything sort of runs very, very precisely. So I think one is that's the mindset. You need different attitudes at different stages of company growth. I think the other is just, at least what I've found is trying to maintain and hold on to your culture, right, as long as you can. For example, I talked about some things earlier. You want to be, at least at Gupshup, we want to be, very innovative, very entrepreneurial, very collaborative, apolitical, to the extent it's possible. I think really focus on solving external problems rather than creating internal challenges. I think empowering people, right? If you want to bring in entrepreneurial people, you have to give them the freedom and the flexibility to do, to experiment, to try different things, because no one has a monopoly on ideas and so on, right? So we operate in such a new, it's a new area that there's greenfield opportunities in every direction. So there's, you can offer entrepreneurial opportunities to people as well, while maintaining structure. You don't want things breaking because we have existing customers and scale and performance and so on. So I think it really so an important thing is it's not just the resume value alone, but the attitude. That's
how do you measure that in an interview? What do you ask to measure that?
I think you can tell very quickly if people are flexible, they have a growth mindset, they are open. If you ask, or even why, like why did you switch from one job to another, or what was the narrative? What's sort of what makes you tick? What's the driving force, right? What's the common thread? And therefore, if you extrapolate from that, right? So some people you can just tell, oh, I was curious and I really wanted to do this, and I tried this and then I tried that. Versus or I had this setback and then I dealt with it and I overcame that. So that tells you, you can sense sort of the resiliency, the ability to deal with changing things, or curiosity, or sense of inquiry and so on, right? And also being a sense of humor, which sort of says you don't take yourself too seriously, right? It's not like your ego is wound up into everything you're talking about, because entrepreneurship is a very humbling experience. I mean, every day, right? Somebody has a smart idea and you don't, and if you get your ego caught in it, right? So a lot of these things, right? I think, and some people are very versatile and adaptive, but others, let's say if they worked in large organizations where your identity is tied into your hierarchy, into the size of your office space, into sort of your title, then those are not the kind of that's not the kind of mindset that will work in a startup environment, where you're really just like, look, let's just get on with it, and who around the room has the best idea, and they could be a junior person, it doesn't matter, right? And so on. Another thing we try to encourage people to do is is creative conflict is good. There are different ideas and so on. You don't want people to be excessively deferential to you have these fresh young kids coming from school going, yes sir, yes sir, yes ma'am, and so on. And so we have a no sir culture in our office, right? Saying, look, I don't want I'd get more mad at you if you do what I said than what you think was right. Right. So it's really important.
How many employees do you have now?
So until a couple months ago, it was 200. We are now touching 300, and we'll probably end up at 400, within a month or so. So it's growing very rapidly. And I think by the end of the year, it may be much larger as well. So we are expanding, also global, right? We are in many countries outside India, and so on. So growing very rapidly.
So does it mean that at some stage when the organization is in multiple countries, there are different geographies to manage and all of that? When you think about the complexity, would it still be possible for you to maintain the culture and the dream that you have?
Oh, absolutely. And it's kind of funny, right? Culture transcends language, right? It transcends geography. I think of course, you have to do the extra bit to engage with people in different places. Now, personally, I've had the luxury or the privilege of, I've spent half my life in India, half my life in the US, right? And I think that already is very different cultures and places. And also, growing up in India, it's such a heterogeneous society that it's very hard to be very insular, because you're always dealing with people who speak different languages, eat different foods, and wear different traditional clothes and so on, right? So you've grown up with this diversity, and diversity doesn't bother you. In fact, you can see the humanity and the personality through those differences, right? Saying, whether it was at IIT or other places, it didn't matter which part of the country you came from. You're really debating ideas and sort of concepts on its merit. So I think dealing with people, I think, again, right, so like if you approach it from first principles, as opposed to saying, oh, this person is different, so they may be, I don't know, if you have a stereotype or a prejudice saying they must be bad or good, I think those are the things that can get you into trouble. But if you're really, open-minded, saying, look, yeah, there may be some cosmetic differences, but there are more similar in really meaningful ways than different. So it makes a huge difference. Yeah. So no, we're growing a lot in Latin America, in Europe, in the US as well. I'm here in Palo Alto right now, right? So I think it's not been a problem. If you and a lot of it depends on the leader, right? I mean, if you project the right kind of culture and personality into the organization, then everybody knows that this is then they don't think about, oh, where we are or what culture or language. It really is just, here's what needs to get done.
Perfect. I just want to sort of say thanks to all of you for joining. Thank you, Beerud. We are at the end of the hour, so thanks a million for joining in. And I so appreciate all the comments and the questions, and we'll keep this going. And next week, again, we are going to be back at the same time with yet another really super interesting person. So just stay tuned. Look forward to your questions. And if you have any questions, you can email me and connect with me on LinkedIn, and we'll take that. So thanks a lot, and goodbye.